Lord of the Mysteries. Chapter 1344. Humanity. Seeing that there weren't any abnormalities in the town of marionettes, Klein began thinking about Miss Justice's encounter. It wasn't Adam who set up an attack against Arihog, but Hermes who masterminded it? Otherwise, it wouldn't be possible for Adam to not descend. It would also be impossible for Arihog to escape so easily. He had to rely on the second city of miracles to have some hope of doing so. If Hermes was the mastermind, the development of this whole episode becomes logical. Hermes never thought of capturing or killing Arihog. He only hopes to learn some information from this ancient mind dragon. When Arihog said, "Adam isn't necessarily Adam," the operation came to a natural end. Yes, from the looks of it, Hermes already had some doubts about Adam's true state. However, due to the limitations of his status, he has been unable to make Arihog appear on his own accord, so he used Miss Justice. Adam isn't necessarily Adam. Arihog isn't necessarily Arihog. This sentence is very interesting. The upper echelons of the spectator pathway are more mysterious than seers. Back then, Dragon of Imagination Anquelt clearly occupied Sequence 0, but he had a Sequence 1 son of the same pathway as him, Dragon of Nightmare, Alzahad. If Adam really isn't Adam, then who is he? Is it that Adam from the myth in the time before the first epic, or part of the primordial one? Or is he related to the resurrection of the ancient sun god? From the looks of it, the meaning behind why Medici addresses him as a zealot has a far more profound meaning. Klein quickly conjured a gold coin and flicked it into the air, making a divination. The results of the divination indicated that today's development was nothing dangerous. Klein immediately dispersed the gold coin and prepared to descend his consciousness into his body beneath St. Ariana Cathedral. At this moment, his actions became slightly sluggish. The moment Miss Justice met Arihog and Hermes was almost simultaneous as the moment the MI9 personnel returned to Utopia to testify in court. Just looking at them individually, there was no problem, but the word simultaneous made Klein somewhat alert. He was very sensitive to words like happened to, coincidence, simultaneous, and almost the same. This was a mark left behind by his past experiences. He tapped his finger on the edge of the long model table and decided to make preparations for his worries. He quickly condensed a light that contained certain words and some kind of will, and he threw it into a prayer light. After doing this, Klein made his consciousness sink and left Sapphira Castle, allowing his mind to return to his original body. Immediately after, he began to influence Utopia. He planned to use all sorts of arrangements to temporarily make all the foreigners leave. This way, even if anything happened, it wouldn't affect the innocent. This also meant that Klein was prepared to abandon Utopia and change locations to rebuild his marionette town. After all, a ritual could be repeated many times, but he could only afford one resurrection. Have a good rest for the next 2 days. There's still some time left before court begins. Biles sent Wendell to the entrance of the Iris' hotel. Wendell replied with a smile, "I'm already feeling sleepy." It was in the middle of the night. He had trouble sleeping previously because of his anxiety and nervousness. That was why he thought of walking around the headquarters of MI9 to ease his mood. However, when he heard the conversation between his colleagues at night, it triggered an eruption in his emotions, and he decided to return to Utopia and face the problem. After checking in, Wendell took his luggage and went to the 3rd floor. When he passed through the door, he vaguely felt that his surroundings were abnormally dark. In order to sleep better, Wendell walked to the window and drew the curtains. During this process, he felt that the scenery outside the window was unusually familiar. However, under the cover of the night, he couldn't tell what was happening too clearly. Thinking that it might have been the scene he had seen in Utopia previously, he covered his mouth with his hand and yawned. He took off his clothes and walked towards the bed. Monica slept until midnight when she suddenly needed to pee. Unable to hold it in any longer, she eventually got out of bed and walked towards her room's attached bathroom. When she pushed the bathroom door open, she found it a little heavier. Rubbing her eyes that were almost unable to open, Monica didn't care about this small change. She quickly relieved herself and ran out of the bathroom to her bed. When she entered the covers, she felt that the temperature was much lower, and she had no choice but to wrap herself up tightly in layers. It didn't take long for her to fall asleep again. About 15 minutes later, the patrolling Biles rubbed his hands and turned towards the street where the police station was. He was about to hand over duties with his colleagues. Suddenly, his body froze in the alley. The black and dense spirit body threads on his body peeled off at the same time as they floated upwards. A pruned and exquisite paper figurine landed and connected to the spirit body threads, quickly turning into another Biles. At the same time, a torrent of mixed knowledge surged over and reassembled him into a man wearing gorgeous clothes with long chestnut hair. The man had blue eyes, a high nose bridge, and thin lips. It was Roselle Gustav's Sequence 1 historical projection. Right on the heels of that, the projection reached out and sucked all the information in the surroundings into its palm, forming an illusory ball of light. This information included all the details that involved Biles. In the next second, Roselle Gustav's historical projection forged a piece of information that was completely normal, allowing it to follow the spirit body threads connected to the paper figurine to the St. Ariana Cathedral in the municipal square, moving straight underground of the cathedral. After this series of actions, another torrent of information surged in midair. With Roselle's help, they reformed into three figures. A middle-aged man wearing a black robe and a hood with a long, thick, white beard. Another, who was draped in a cloak, had black hair, blue eyes, and a rather squarish face. He was a middle-aged man with a dignified bearing. On one of the trees, there was a huge tree that seemed to be drenched with petroleum. On the tree, there were arms with all sorts of strange protruding objects that rolled with bloodshot eyes. They were the leader of the secret order, Zeratul. Lone's protector, the first king, William Augustus I's historical projection. A historical projection of Abomination Sua. After making the necessary preparations, Zeratul used the location provided by the historical projection to sneak into Utopia. He didn't waste any time. He reached out with his right hand and used the law of convergence of beyonder characteristics to suck out the worm of spirit in Biles. Elsewhere, the palm of Abomination Sua's historical projection made an ugly doll the size of a palm appear. The doll was wet and sticky. It had no eyes, ears, or nose. It only had a pinhole-like mouth that emitted and sucked grayish-white fog. As the worm of spirit and the doll approached, the black and white eyeballs that rolled out on the Sua tree trunk looked at them at the same time. Silently, the worm of spirit fused with the ugly doll, causing it to distort as it squirmed, growing out eyes, nose, and ears, making it look like Klein Moretti. At this point, Zeratul no longer did any concealment, nor could he do so. He took out a black shroud and abruptly wrapped Klein's doll up. All the marionette's spirit body threads in Utopia were severed at the same time. They were unable to connect to the true body. This wasn't because there was something wrong with them, but that the true body was isolated from them. All of a sudden, the duty personnel in the police station, tenants in the hotel, Tracy and the thieves in the cell, Anderson in another apartment, Alzu, and the other citizens all stopped breathing and turned stiff. Regardless of whether they were sleeping or doing something else, it was as if a pause button had been pressed. Klein, who was at the bottom of St. Ariana Cathedral, suddenly woke up. He knew that an accident had happened. He didn't hesitate. With a thought, he returned to Sapphira Castle. With the level and strength of a king of angels, he was able to resist enemies that had shown or had yet to show themselves. This was the best choice in the current situation. Even if he wasn't able to protect his true body, Klein still had a chance to revive. At that moment, his floating consciousness touched an invisible, dark barrier, making it difficult to penetrate it and enter Sapphira Castle. Klein's heart tightened, believing that the enemy might be more troublesome than he had imagined. Few high-level existences knew he could return to Sapphira Castle with a thought. In the next second, the thick, petroleum-slathered tree had arrived above St. Ariana Cathedral. In addition, a deep and dignified voice resounded. Wandering is prohibited here. Teleportation is prohibited here. Klein wasn't led by his emotions. Seeing that he couldn't return to Sapphira Castle at the moment, he immediately changed his strategy and leaped towards the fog of history. The moment the grayish-white fog entered his eyes, it turned into a whirlpool formed by countless transparent maggots. The vortex extended out slippery tentacles covered with strange patterns. Unlike previously, the vortex emitted a powerful suction force, causing Klein's figure to speed up and be entangled by countless tentacles. Law of Beyonder Characteristics Convergence. The law of Beyonder characteristic convergence between angels. A subtle beam of light flashed as Klein, who was firmly controlled by Zeradal's mythical creature form, turned into a paper figurine. This was an angel-level application of paper figurine substitutes, as well as the help of grafting. Although Klein couldn't return to Sapphira Castle, he could influence the worms of spirit above the gray fog, allowing them to use the curtain to provide help. After dodging Zeradal's fatal blow, Klein ran into the fog of history and fled towards the former metropolis from a time before the first epoch. At this moment, many marionettes, who had been dead for a long time in Utopia, rapidly decayed from losing the spirit-body threads maintaining them. Their limbs dropped to the ground or mutated because of their Beyonder characteristics. The latter transformed into different monsters, ones far more terrifying than imaginable. Some swallowed their heads, others were left with only squirming flesh, while others grew dense eyes. Soon, Klein ran into the old metropolis situated inside the fog of history. To him, this was a safe room that could be trusted. This was because only a scholar of yore who was a human from before history could enter. Without any hesitation, Klein habitually surveyed the area and began praying to the Evernight goddess in the Stack City. Oof! A faint sound rang out as an ancient wooden stake with traces of blood penetrated Klein's heart from behind. A figure phased into existence behind him. It was a cold-looking man wearing a half-top hat and a black trench coat, Gehrman Sparrow. Klein's pupils dilated as the crazy adventurer said in a deep voice, "Adam has given me humanity.